The human being is the only animal that thinks about the future. One defining nature of humanity is that we often think about the future. While non-human animals often act as though they have the capacity to think about the future, only humans really can. Conscious experience is humans' greatest achievement. Our ability to imagine objects and episodes that do not exist in reality often allows us to think about the future. A philosopher once noted that the human brain is an anticipation machine, and making future is the most important thing it does. The brain is like an abacus. It can add past to present to make the future without thinking. It is quite interesting that human thoughts about the future are abstractions. While not being exactly conscious of it, we are designed to advance at the moment. And even though there are a few caught up in a trap of living in a permanent present state, humans are known to conjure imaginary tomorrows. All of the human struggle is to create a happy life. Now, happiness rarely comes freely, so to create it, you have to gain a true understanding of it, the basics of which are contained in this summary. Happiness is a feeling so subjective that people can be wrong about their own emotional experience. Happiness is used to indicate three things. Emotional happiness, the most basic of the three. Emotional happiness is a phrase for a feeling and an experience. Emotional happiness is a subjective state, and therefore, has no objective referent. It is a feeling like the one that makes our bellies warm up. Moral happiness, there is a school of thought that follows that the word happiness does not indicate a good feeling. Rather, it indicates a very special good feeling that stems from living one's life in a proper and morally right way, a Socrates and non-pig-like way. Judgmental happiness, this is when the word is used to express a belief about the merits of some things. In this case, when we use the word happy, we are saying that something is a potential source of a pleasurable feeling, even if we don't necessarily feel it at the moment. Happiness, as a subjective feeling, is difficult to explain, to ourselves and to others. Due to the subjectivity therein, it's very difficult to evaluate people's claim of their own happiness. A great number of people cannot plan or imagine their future accurately. This is largely due to the fact that experience is subjective. Ideally, people shouldn't know how others are feeling, but they are expected to know how they feel themselves. It is therefore strange when, sometimes, people seem not to know their hearts. Oftentimes, people say what they perceive to be true, but their perception is wrong. The idea that we can have mistaken feelings about some things seems impossible, but it does happen. Sometimes, we feel pain when there actually is none. And there are few times we do not feel pain when in fact, we are in pain. There is a difference between feeling pain and believing one is feeling pain. Human experience is distinct from awareness as our recollections aren't perfect. The concepts of experience and awareness might seem alike, but there is quite a huge distinction. This disassociation can cause a lot of confusion with our emotions and experiences. This gap between experiences can be bridged by keeping in mind these three premises. There is no perfectly reliable tool to measure someone's happiness. Many devices have been created by scientists to this end, yet they all end up being another imperfect approximation of the truth. Subjective happiness made sure of that. Therefore, we need to accept and sort of embrace the imperfection of truth. Measuring methods. There are other measures to happiness, but the measures of subjective experience, despite their flaws, are better options. The honest, real, timed report might have its own imperfections, but it is the least flawed. Other means such as physiography and electromyography are much more rigorous, scientific and more objective than a person's claims. Imperfections in measurement are only a problem when we don't recognize them. If recognized, the researcher could opt for the option of large numbers, i.e., ask many people the same questions and opt for the most common answers. This has lots of odds, but calculations can be properly done. We often like to think that our recollections are completely accurate, but the truth is the brain is tricky. In fact, our recollections often lack accuracy or realism. This is largely due to the fact that our imagination relies heavily on memory and perception, which are prone to add false details to our recollections and thoughts. There are certain details we miss out on, yet our brain fills them up. Our brains attempt to complete the missing piece in the puzzle. Good intentions, maybe, but this does threaten the idea of truth. We see things that aren't really there, remember things that didn't really happen because our brain chooses to fill up for these things. Without the filling in trick the brain pulls on us, we all would have sketchy memories and an empty imagination. We'd be missing out on this subjective experience that so defines our truth. Even though it comes at a price, the brain, through these feelings, help us form a smooth and normal reality. Our imagined future is always a reflection of our present. Human imagination is structurally biased toward the present, and it thoroughly infuses our imaginations of the future with realities of the present. Just like the past is different from the present and the future are two separate worlds which often get mixed up in the head. This makes people carry projections of their current circumstance and values onto the future. It's often a problem to have the present and the future mixed up, as the future is often so distinct from the present so that the projections are misleading. Humans do not just sit down with a sheet of paper and start logically listing the pros and cons of the future events we are contemplating, but rather, we contemplate them by stimulating those events in our imaginations and then noting our emotional reactions to the stimulation. Just as imagination previews objects, so does it pre-feel events. Daniel Todd Gilbert. Pre-feeling is kinder on our minds than logical thinking. It allows us to predict our emotions better than logical thinking. It's often more accurate to depend on our emotional reaction as opposed to thinking long and hard. Pre-feeling allows no thinkers to predict their future satisfaction more accurately than thinkers do. However, pre-feeling has its own limitations. We can't always rely on how we feel when we imagine something. This is largely because our sensory organs can't handle a collision of imagination and reality. We can't see or feel two things at once. We can't imagine a penguin when in fact, we are seeing an ostrich. Same way, we can't feel good about an imaginary future when we are feeling bad about the actual present. While humans tend to tire of a constant recurrence of events, our future is shaped by the present. The wonder and thrills of some experiences wane in the face of repetition. This is because we quickly adapt to experiences and they yield less pleasure with more occurrence. This is called habituation or declining marginal utility. Habituation occurs when an innate response to a frequently repeated stimuli diminishes. Humans can, however, beat habituation using these two ways. Time. One way to avoid habituation is to increase the amount of time that separates repetitions of an existence. Spaced experiences offer endless delight and as such, are less likely to tire one out. Variety. In order to avoid habituation, it is important to spice up one's experiences or we might end up boring ourselves, or partners. Time and variety are two ways to combat habituation, and one of the two is effective enough. While we try to figure out how to deal with habituation, it is important to know that the present has a great influence on our imagined tomorrow. Humans deal with an overwhelming urge to view the past using standards of the present. For instance, one might despise Thomas Jefferson for keeping slaves or Sigmund Freud for patronizing women, even though racism and sexism are moral standards that were non-existent at the time of their indiscrepancies. This phenomenon is called presentism. Presentism poses a problem to futurians and is worse when people have to look forward rather than backward. Predictions of the future are made in the present, and as such, the former is always influenced by the latter. Our thoughts and feelings now have a very strong influence on how we think and feel in the future. This is because the reality of the present is so strong that it projects on our imagined future. The human psychological system must effectively defend the mind against pain. It is clear that things cannot be other than the way they are, for as all things have been created for some end, they must necessarily be created for the best end. For instance, noses were made to support spectacles, hence we wear spectacles. Legs, as anyone can see, were made for breeches, and so we wear breeches. Stones were made to be shaped into castles, thus my lord has a fine castle because the greatest baron in the province ought to have the finest house. And because pigs were made to be eaten, we eat pork all year round. So those who say that everything is well are speaking foolishly, they should say that everything is best. Dr. Pangloss. Rather than think of humans the way Pangloss has described, we could think of them as having a psychological immune system that defends the mind against unhappiness in much the same way that the physical immune system defends the body against illness. The physical immune system is designed to defend the body well. However, it can't overplay its part. If the physical immune system is hypoactive, we are left prone to infections. Also, if it is hyperactive, it tends to defend the body against itself, leading to autoimmune disease. There has to be a balance. This condition equally applies to the psychological immune system. The psychological immune system must not over-defend us in the face of loss, failure, misfortune, or rejection, however, it needs to defend us well enough. A healthy psychological immune system strikes a balance that allows us to feel good enough to cope with our situation but bad enough to do something about it. We are often immune to reality. Human psychology is a defensive system that always finds a way to shift blame in the face of sad experiences. Large-scale assaults on our happiness trigger our psychological defenses. However, not every little inconvenience triggers these defenses. Little shocks do not trigger our psychological defenses. This way, it is sometimes more difficult to achieve a positive view of a bad experience than a very bad experience. Intense suffering triggers our psychological defenses, influencing our experiences in ways we don't expect. When the experience we are having is not the one we want, our first reaction is to find a different one. This explains why we return bad gadgets, check out of unsatisfactory hotels and stop hanging out with people that make us feel uncomfortable. However, when we can't change an experience, our mind resorts to changing our view of the experience. We often find a positive view of things we're stuck with, like annoying uncles and lousy sisters. Our mind is trained to find these silver linings only when we must, when it's inescapably, inevitably, and irrevocably ours. Inescapable experiences trigger our psychological defenses that enable us to have a positive view of those circumstances, but we do not have an inkling that this would happen. Our memory often misrepresents the past. Humans should learn from their experiences, and that is just what we do. We try to avoid repeating experiences that have caused us embarrassment and regret. But then, we often don't remember these events accurately so as to take steps to avoid them in the future. This is because our memory clips and saves key elements of an experience and then uses these elements to rewrite the story whenever we seek a recollection. This explains why we usually remember only the significant details of past events. The clip and save method is quite effective, however, it has its own few quirks. We naturally assume that the things that come easily to mind are things we frequently experience. Our memory clips and saves key elements of the past experience, and, whenever we seek a recollection, use them to rewrite the story. What we don't realize is that sometimes, details of an event easily come to mind because such an event is uncommon, because we paid special attention to it while the event was taking place. And because of this error, we sometimes plan wrongly ahead. This error of misrepresenting the past can cause us to imagine the future wrongly, as it affects our predictions of our emotional future. Our memory for emotional episodes is greatly influenced by unusual theories about how we must have felt in the past, all of which are full of errors that compromise our ability to learn from our experience. Rather than our memories, it's safer to rely on the experiences of others. The future is hard to see, but we're all heading there someday, and it's up to us to make decisions to aim for the futures we want or get away from the ones we're avoiding. We all owe it to ourselves to make sure that our dreams and wishes for our respective futures come true. And to do this, we must take appropriate actions and steps that will lead us right to the life we want. It is up to each one of us to make the future we want for ourselves come to reality. We are, however, bound to make mistakes while imagining our future, so how do we decide what to do? The experience of others. One of the benefits of being a social and linguistic animal is that we can capitalize on the experience of others rather than trying to figure everything out for ourselves. Daniel Todd Gilbert. Rather than rely on our far from perfect memory, it's safer to turn to past experiences of the people around us. We don't have to imagine what it would feel like to marry a doctor, change jobs, or move to a new house when we have people around us eager to share from their wealth of experiences. Conclusion. Imagination has its own shortcomings, as it often fails to provide us with accurate previews of our emotional futures. Our imagination fills in and leaves out as it deems fit, projects the past onto the future, and also fails to recognize that bad things won't feel so bad once they happen. These shows that imaginations aren't accurate predictions of our future emotional experiences. Our thoughts and feelings today lead up to our thoughts and feelings in future. Therefore, the best way to predict our feelings tomorrow is to see how others are feeling today. People, however, do not often use this method as they should. We pay little or no attention to the present as a gauge for tomorrow. We should do better. Even though it doesn't suit our ego, we should always listen to people communicate their beliefs about happiness. This way, we can shape up an accurate idea of satisfaction. We need to acknowledge that we have a lot to learn from the emotional experience of others, and it does make sense to observe their level of happiness in different circumstances. Only this way can we quite accurately gauge a healthy future emotional well-being and thus, create our own happiness. Try this: rid yourself of all narcissistic views and behaviors. Rid yourself of all narcissistic views and behaviors. Clear out the garbage and take control of your emotional state of mind. Learn from the experiences of people around you. Things might not look very clear from the outside, but look deep inside. There's always something to learn.